Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime.
Hayden. Can you tell me what impact Judy Garland had on the LGBTQIA plus community and maybe what she represents for the community?
I feel like there's probably a lot Judy Garland resents
There was a lot that she resented.
regarding her connection to the community.
No, there was not. That's not true at all.
No. Ask me the second part of your question again.
What impact Judy Garland had on the LGBTQIA plus community and what she represents for the community.
Sure. I think you know as well as I do that The Wizard of Oz is one of RuPaul Andre Charles' favorite movies.
Not the government name.
And for a lot of queer people, The Wizard of Oz is such an exciting movie because it plays with the concept of honoring who we are and also being hopeful for a better tomorrow, a solution. People love Dorothy and they love that character. They love Judy Garland's portrayal so deeply that the queer community actually integrated Dorothy into our shared cultural experience, our lexicon. And for a long time, when queer people had to talk in code, especially gay men, friend of Dorothy was a way to signal that you were a gay man, a queer person. So if someone asked, are you a friend of Dorothy? They weren't curious if you knew a Dorothy, but rather, were you down on your knees in the alleyway while you were at the club? So... especially if we're talking that time period.
Go ahead. What I read is that a lot of the appeal is there's this black and white rural life, especially for gay men who grew up in small towns where things were black and white. And then the appeal of the city where things are bright and colorful and glittery. And there are people who are quirky who accept them. And so there's also that dynamic that the movie has that really appealed to, well, still does appeal to. I mean, come on. We're in the throes of Wicked right now. This is enduring for people. But yeah, that there was that element as well to the movie and how Dorothy and Judy Garland and all of that kind of became a symbol within the gay community, the LGBTQ community.
I like that explanation, especially when we think in terms of binaries and the kind of staunch enforcement of such binaries, especially in the time period, but still. And so, I mean, just in terms of motif, black and white versus being color, showing that there's variations across the spectrum, and then leaving behind a particular role to fulfill something different, and then to return with a new perspective. I think there are so many themes that we could extrapolate as to why it's so important to queer people, but I think you really nailed it. So yeah, that's what I think about Judy Garland's impact. Also, there are a lot of queer people who are just really taken with the kind of histrionics and her personal story as Judy Garland, a woman who was exploited, abused substances as a way to cope with her exploitation. Oh gosh, married to a queer producer or a director for a period of time, one of her husbands. I can't remember which one it was. Vincent? I don't know.
I didn't actually research Judy Garland per se, but we are going to come back to some of the things that you already touched on later on because we are going to bring things back around to Judy Garland for just a brief moment, but she is not the focus of this case.
Okay. Well, she is an icon. She is beloved and, just like her daughter Eliza. So they belong in the pantheon of greats.
Of divas.
If someone wanted to understand even better, maybe part of the exploration of that dichotomy, I can't recommend enough. Not my text tone going off. Supercuts just sent me a $5 coupon, and I do need a supercut.
Supercut just sent me something I have to edit out.
There's a book by Eric Cervini called The Deviance War, The Homosexual versus the United States of America. And it really details why pride is so important. And that's been on my mind. I've seen a lot of TikTok posts from younger queer people who are like, well, what's the point of pride?
Mhm.
Why is pride not family friendly? Why is pride this and that? And I won't spend too much time going on a tangent now,
Yeah,
but if you
you can hold it for later, it will come up.
but if you read the Deviant's War, it makes it really clear how pride was a hard-fought victory.
So, I am going to be telling you about the life, legacy, and tragic loss of Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson was many things, but most prominently, she was a trailblazer in the LGBTQIA plus rights movement. I'm just going to do a bit of a disclaimer right now. I vary the way that I use all of the letters because it's a lot. It's a mouthful to say LGBTQIA plus every time. So, especially depending on where we are in time, I kind of default to what it was at the time a little bit, but I make sure that I keep it varied so that everyone has their representation. There's just a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's been many evolutions in the queer community over just a few decades.
There have, yeah. All right. So, Marsha was born on August 24th, 1945, in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to Malcolm and Alberta Michaels. Malcolm worked at General Motors, and Alberta worked as a housekeeper. Marsha was the fifth of 7 children, and at 16 years old, Marsha was, quote, married to Jesus at the Mount Teman African Methodist Episcopal Church, where the family attended. Also a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. That is a lot of different faith in one breath. Did you mention that they were an African American family?
I have not. I don't really touch on this much later. I meant to include it, but I didn't. But Marsha's religious beliefs played a huge role in her life throughout her entire life. So that's all I really know, that at 16 she was married to Jesus and that the family attended the Mount Teman African Methodist Episcopal Church, which I wasn't planning on saying more than once, but here we are.
African Methodist Episcopal Church.
The Mount Teman African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Mhm. Okay, got
Said
it.
it 3 times, it might appear.
My brain can't process all of that in conjunction with each other.
And
It
I'm
takes
looking
me
at it, and it's still difficult to put together. Just the Methodist and Episcopal is a lot for me.
was it Kennedy Davenport who did Robin Fierce during Snatch Game when she was being Karen Huger and she named the church that she went to? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I remember her playing that character.
I think she gives this really long-winded Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalian, apostolic, like she gives them a really long answer, which was much funnier than what she was given credit for now that I've watched it again recently.
Yeah,
That answer was funny.
right.
And it's funnier now that I hear you say it, and I do hear 2 different denominations smacked together, and I'm curious if it's that both are represented. Is it a hybrid? Is it its own thing? So anyways, lots of questions, and it made me think of other queer culture.
Yeah, Drag Race. I actually made it through this entire thing without talking about RuPaul or Drag Race or anything, which is almost impressive because it definitely talks about drag queens. But I'm here, obviously, for any Drag Race infusion that we do.
Anything draggy.
Of course. So, Marsha was assigned male at birth and began wearing dresses at 5 years old, but she stopped wearing the dresses for a period of time after some harassment from males that lived nearby.
Did her family allow her to wear the dresses?
I think so. The home dynamic is a little bit unclear. There are some things where it seems like she was maybe accepted, at least as a gay man. It is unclear at what point in her young life that she was sexually assaulted by a 13-year-old boy, but she reflected on this as a moment that made her think that being gay was an unattainable concept, and she opted to live a celibate life until 1961 when she was 17, at which point she left for New York City.
I thought she went to Albany.
Albany? Upstate
Oh,
New
wait, she
York.
didn't go to Buffalo?
Upstate New York, where they're really known for being progressive.
Poughkeepsie? Wait, is that in New
I
Jersey?
think that's in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Well, I found a source that implied that the sexual assault happened around the same time that she stopped wearing the dresses, which would mean that she was 5. At home, things weren't always rainbows and sunshine. Her mother made statements during her childhood, it seems, about being homosexual being worse than being a dog, to which I naturally take offense on both accounts because
Is there anything better than being a dog?
right. I was like, being gay, being a dog, what what? This is bad? I mean, I know that the experience can be challenging, but I mean, my dogs just got here to England.
You and
They've
your
been
bitch is
here.
rolling deep.
They haven't even been here a week. They live a pretty nice life.
Their schnauzers are German, right?
Yeah.
You should take them to visit their homeland at some point.
You know what? I talked to them about us moving to Liverpool so I could be a Scouser and they could be Scouser Schnauzers.
How did they feel about it?
I think they're thinking about it.
Okay, good, good. They can take their time.
I actually think Jenny was like, get me out of here. Is this bitch for real right now?
Send me back to the US. I'll go live with grandma.
So anyway, yeah, being gay is worse than being a dog. Honestly though, the way that dogs should be treated, everything in the world should be worse than that. We don't deserve them. So, but you know, that's just me. So I digress. Her mom also apparently told her that she needed to find a, quote, homosexual billionaire, unquote, boyfriend or husband to take care of her for the rest of her life. And honestly,
Her mom's not giving bad advice.
I'm like, I would also maybe like to find a homosexual billionaire willing to take care of me for the rest of my life. If you are accepting applications, just let me know.
So nice.
Okay, so let's just take a moment to talk about the history of criminalizing gender identity and transness in the US. A little bit of history. Don't dive too much into any of it, but so the word transgender did not make its widespread use with the understanding of what it means today until after it was adopted in the 1990s. Transgender is used to make sure that everyone understands what someone's genital situation is, regardless of if that would ever impact their interaction or dynamic. People who transition simply don't feel that the gender assigned to them at birth best represents who they are. Full stop. And everybody wants that to be their business, and they want to care about what toilet they use. I guess that's not really history. I do get into a little bit more, but I don't know if you've picked up on this, but I've got a lot of hard-hitting topics here, and if we were going to dive into all of them, we would be here all night.
The history of what it means to be trans is so deeply varied and seen throughout history and has its place in different cultures at different levels of status. And so we're not talking about some kind of simple, static, what's the right word?
History?
Phenomenon,
Yeah.
history. We're talking about something that is varied and multifaceted. And so I think to say in terms of at large for our audience, for people who listen in the United States and for people who maybe listen abroad in places like Canada, I think our listeners probably already have an understanding of what being transgender is and what it means. I think when I think about trans people, trans individuals, and I think back to my time being a teacher, I know a lot of people who have beliefs that don't necessarily lend themselves to being trans friendly, but the real truth of the matter is that when you actually know a trans person, when you know a trans child, I think that a part of your perception changes and you start to realize that humanity is so much deeper than your gender presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really shameful that right now there are people who push a narrative that humanity is less than gender presentation. Mm-hmm. So I understand what you're saying, and I think you're right. And I think if we wanted to go through the history of, I don't even know if it's a word you like that's used, transgenderism, is that right? Is that wrong? Does that need to be cut? It feels like a dangerous word. The trans experience. I don't know what I was saying anymore, but yeah, I was just co-signing what you said.
Okay, so with Marsha being a transgender woman, there wasn't necessarily the language or understanding at the time that she was growing up in the 50s and after. There wasn't really enough understanding at the time for there to be legal protections for trans people. And instead, throughout the 50s and 60s, members of the LGBT community often faced discrimination and arrest for being themselves.
Do you know what the language was for transgender individuals at that time? Were they referred to as transsexuals? Were they referred to as cross-dressers? What were they referred to as?
I did see transsexuals and transvestites, which
Transvestite. I always forget about that word.
yeah,
But
because
then
it
I think of
feels,
Rocky Horror Picture Show, and it's
but also drag queens or queens.
uh-huh.
But yeah, I think transvestites and queens was primarily what I saw in the context of this case. So legislation at the time still focused on what happened in intimate moments in private dwellings between two consenting adults and anything that deviated from heteronormative gender expression. Police were known to be violent when faced with homosexuality. Gay bars were often raided, and things such as facial hair and clothing helped to determine whether someone was expressing themselves in a way that matched their gender assigned at birth.
All under the guise of disorderly conduct, lewd conduct, morality searches. I'm telling you, The Deviants War, fantastic piece of literature for this time period.
It's funny because everything that you're hitting on, it does come up in what I've written, but not at the same time that you're touching on it. So it's like we're telling the same story, which I guess we are.
You're telling the story. I'm just, when things are activated in my brain.
Yeah, you're adding. You're enhancing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it is commonly believed that there was a 3-article rule where people had to be able to show they were wearing at least 3 articles of clothing that matched their assigned gender. But this was just an informal rule that was enforced by some police forces. If they were not found wearing at least 3 articles of clothing that matched their birth certificate, they could be arrested. Back to Marsha, though. After she dropped out of high school during her senior year, she ended up joining the Army under her birth name, or dead name, at the end of 62, and used her 6 months enlisted to complete her GED, and was discharged honorably in June of 1963.
Why was she discharged honorably?
Because she just wanted to get her GED.
But I mean, not necessarily what she wanted, but how did they manage to make her discharge honorable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It also makes me question, was she discharged honorably at the time? Or is that something that was maybe done posthumously or
Not
something like that?
posthumously. It wasn't posthumous. The way that I understood it in the 2 sources that I saw it in, it was at the time.
Okay.
It makes me wonder, now that you're asking the question, if it had something to do with her being perceived as a gay man and maybe an attempt to amicably go our separate ways, because I mean, this was obviously before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but I imagine that it would not have been a positive experience if the Army was found to have openly gay men enlisted.
I feel like queer people weren't allowed.
Yeah.
I don't think you could have identified as queer or even been perceived as very queer and managed to stay in the military. And in my brain, I was thinking, well, surely that doesn't come with an honorable discharge. But maybe it did. Maybe it was that simple. I don't know. I know that there was a certain criteria that was used to exclude queer people. And it even has kind of a colloquial name, but I can't remember what it is. P47. That's probably wrong. But it was the actual code that was used to designate queer people.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Can I actually just look it up real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Military code to exclude gay people, 1960s. So that's right. So military policies, as well as the DSM, deemed homosexuality as a psychiatric disorder, leading to the discharge of individuals based on perceived mental unfitness or undesirable habits and traits of character.
That's kind of what I was saying.
Yeah.
Discharging in order to separate yourself from the stigma that would have been associated with a gay person.
Why do we need pride?
So when Marsha moved to New York, she said she had $15 and a bag of clothes. And she started waiting tables in Greenwich Village, which is also where she lived during that time. She met an 11-year-old trans girl, Sylvia Rivera, and the two became fast friends, having had similar experiences. Marsha helped Sylvia learn to love herself, and Sylvia felt like Marsha was kind of a mother to her. Part of not having the same lingo to express identity as we have today, Marsha would refer to herself as a queen, meaning drag queen, which would make sense with the idea of her being Sylvia's mom, with drag families being really prominent in the drag queen community. The first person who helps to put a fledgling queen into drag is considered to be their drag mom, oftentimes maintaining this relationship where they help out the young queen for a while to help them perfect their craft, learn the tricks of the trade, and find their identity as a queen. Marsha P. Johnson became her drag name that she performed under, and while she had said that the P stood for Piola, what she more commonly claimed was that the P stood for pay it no mind.
I like that.
A phrase she had taken to using whenever asked about her gender. She actually at one point used the pay it no mind line when asked by a judge about it. He found it comical and it ended up leading to her release.
Oh, that worked out.
Yeah. Can you tell me anything about pictures that you've seen of Marsha P. Johnson? Is there anything about what she wears that may have stood out to you?
No, I'm not very good at capturing or reviewing mental images in my mind. I really struggle with that. And so it's hard, but I can kind of see a picture of Marsha P. Johnson that I've seen a lot, and I think it's a mural, and it's one with a flower in her hair. But outside of that, my brain it's not creating an image.
Yeah, she was known to wear flower crowns made of real flowers that she would collect from tables she slept under in the flower district that had been discarded.
Okay. Yeah, I do have that in my mind.
Mm-hmm. In most pictures that you see of her, she's got a flower crown on. Her clothing was considered to be a hybrid of what would traditionally be considered male and female clothing, with her wearing a lot of flowing pieces on her tall, slim frame, sparkly dresses, red plastic heels, and bright wigs.
You know, the way she discussed it and pay it no mind makes me wonder if she would have identified as genderqueer or non-binary, if she had had the choice, or if that was common nomenclature, or if that was something that had really been discussed. Obviously, I think we could think of it as a defense mechanism. Pay it no mind. It's no big deal.
It's not your business.
Right. But part of me also feels like if you can take a comedic stance or say something comedic to something so serious, it lends itself to me thinking, I wonder what her gender presentation felt like internally versus just externally.
Yeah. Her drag performances were not necessarily considered high drag, with most of her work being political or grassroots. Most of her performances. As early as the 1930s, Greenwich Village, where Marsha settled initially when she moved to New York in the 60s, had become a haven for the LGBTQ community. By the 60s, it had begun to expand a little bit further west than it had originally been, and it was along Christopher Street. In 1966, 4 members of the Genovese family bought the Stonewall Inn and turned it from a restaurant to a gay bar. Is this too much of a jump, or are you following?
I'm following.
Okay. It feels like I'm all over the place. It feels like I'm like Judy Garland, Marsha P. Johnson, trans, back to Marsha P. Johnson, Stonewall's history.
I think it's fine.
Okay. The Stonewall Inn was a location that was known for its wealthy homosexual clientele, and at some point, although it is not exactly clear when, Marsha was allowed to frequent the venue. According to her, she was one of the first queens allowed to go, with the patronage being around 98% male.
Okay. God, that's so many men. Jesus Christ.
But gay men.
Yeah, that's still just a lot of... I love to be in the presence of my kin. It can just be tiring.
Being that they were mafiosos, the Genovese owners would bribe the police to not raid their club, but we know that that was sometimes in vain. Despite them operating a bar, they were unable to obtain a liquor license because in the 60s it was illegal to knowingly sell liquor to members of the LGBT community.
We don't deserve to have fun. Just kidding. Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't even legal to be gay. So, you know, why were you... some of that just feels moot. Like, did New York State have an anti-sodomy law on the books?
Oh, I'm sure. That's what I was saying. They're trying to police people's private moments that they're having between consenting adults. Like, I don't understand why that's the business of the police. You're at your own home.
So weird what people care about.
Yeah.
What people still care about.
And what they don't care about.
Yeah.
Like guns in schools. The number of times I've been asked by students if I was ever in a school shooting. When you're not in America, they just think that that's everyone's experience. Anyway, the New York State Liquor Authority considered LGBTQ people to be engaging in disorderly conduct, which is what you said earlier, which was their justification for making this a legal matter and affording them the opportunity to oppress and discriminate through a legal avenue. As a result of this, a private cub?
Cub? A baby bear? For hire?
Oh no.
I think they're called otters, but there are cubs.
Aww.
I guess cub is what bridges otter and bear.
There ain't no way that this is what we're talking about.
Little cub.
Oh gosh. Do you want to explain bears and otters to those listeners who may not know?
If you know, you know. If you don't, that's okay. Not everything is always for everybody.
Yeah. So, as a result of this, a private club license was acquired for the Stonewall Inn, permitting the owners to circumvent the need for a liquor license from the New York State Liquor Authority. Which, you know what that makes me think of? What was that place in Three Rivers that we would go to that we would have to be a part of the club because they were outside of the city limits, so they couldn't get a liquor license? Cherry Poppin' Time, you spit a drink all over the place. Pepe Boudreaux's.
Pepe Boudreaux's, yes. Yeah, boudin balls.
Oh,
so
God.
Gross.
Yeah. Oh man. There's just the name is ridiculous.
I don't even remember what Cherry Poppin' Time was about.
They brought our drinks and I didn't want cherries in my drink, but you and Miranda were like, yes, we do. And so then you asked for extra cherries or something. And when they came and set them down, you immediately took your drink and Miranda goes, it's Cherry Poppin' Time. And you just spit everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was funny.
In the meantime, Judy Garland had become an icon for the LGBTQIA plus community.
Okay. Now it's starting to feel like we might be everywhere.
Hold on. We're gonna get there.
Okay.
We're doing this thing now where we're gonna we've got two things that are happening almost simultaneously, so we're bouncing back and forth between the two because they're about to collide in a way.
We're hitting the merge. I got it.
Asked how she felt about having a large gay fan base, she said, I couldn't care less. I sing for people. So no, she didn't resent her fan base being LGBT. Anyway, by 1967, Judy's name had been solidified as a symbol within the gay community, having people refer to their friends as their Judys, and her iconic role as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz provided the community with a phrase they could use to identify one another. They simply just had to ask, are you a friend of Dorothy's? It was one of those if you know things.
I forgot about the good Judy part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is also believed that there is a link between the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow and how the pride flag came to be represented via the rainbow. After acquiring the license to operate the Stonewall Inn as a private club, they renovated the building, blacking out the windows for privacy, reinforcing the doors with steel, adding peepholes and extra locks on the doors in anticipation of police raids. The same year that Judy's name was linked as a gay icon, 67, is when the Stonewall Inn officially opened its doors as a gay bar on March 18th. The renovation was done in part to make it look like any other regular bar, not something that was exclusively for the LGBT community, really for gay men. But I'm not convinced that the cops didn't know what was going on there. Yeah. Bouncers used the peepholes to screen for straight people and police.
Sorry, straights.
Gosh, the discrimination that the straights have
the fact
faced.
That you can just live openly and out loud every other fucking place. God forbid you can't come to the Stonewall.
I would have been very sad, but I would have understood. I might have been vouched for, though. That was the thing. But so if you had already been there, they would let you in, or if they looked through the peephole, through the peephole, and they could tell that you were gay, you could come in. But if you were straight or looked like a cop, you were not allowed in.
Listen, a gay person knows another gay person.
Oh,
I don't care. I don't care how straight you say you are. I don't care that you have a wife. I don't care that you have 17 kids. I know a gay person when I see them. I know a gay person when I smell them. I know a gay person when I hear their voice. Even if it's
crazy.
Right.
So mostly those at the bar were gay men, but there seemed to be some representation from all of the LGBTQIA plus community permitted in.
Okay.
Particularly, they mentioned in more than one source, butch lesbians.
Who do you think the bouncer is?
A friend of Dorothy's. On June 22nd, 1969, today's June 22nd,
Oh.
the LGBTQ community suffered the devastating loss of a vocal ally and an idol who had come to represent so much for them when Judy Garland was found dead of a barbiturates overdose in her bathroom in London. 4 days later, after her body had been taken back to New York City, over 20,000 people lined up to pay their respects to her. The following day, on June 27th, her funeral was held. The gay community was reeling from this, with emotions heightened, and it is believed that, in part, this heightened state could have contributed to the events that would happen in the early hours of the next morning at the Stonewall Inn. When the police attempted to arrest Stormy DeLarverie, she fought back, and the Stonewall riots began as a result of the crowd watching on and witnessing the police knocking people over on their way back to the police car with, quote, a butch lesbian in handcuffs. But you're saying that Stormy was a drag king?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that is so upsetting is that when we talk about these raids that they conducted against queer establishments, not only were they intentionally inflicting pain and breaking up queer spaces, but they also stripped these people of their dignity and their humanity and would like force their heads in mop buckets and do all kinds of crazy stuff in an effort to shatter the illusion that they had created using makeup or clothing, anything to strip them of what made them feel whole, complete, and queer. And so it wasn't like these were just nice knocks on the door.
No.
Hey, are you doing gay things here? They were terrorizing a space, making it impossible to feel safe and queer at the same time. It was its own form of terrorism.
Even taking drag queens into like the drunk tank and forcing them in makeup to undress, things that were designed to humiliate, that stuff happens like within recent history.
Yeah. Still.
Yeah. I'm just so enmeshed in like drag race, and like if you were to look at who I follow on Instagram, overwhelmingly I would say that the majority of who I follow is somebody who belongs to the LGBTQ plus community. And so I sometimes have a hard time remembering that other people don't celebrate it the same way that I do. Okay, so it's not clear if that's Stormy or what, because that came from two different sources, but I'm going to assume that it was Stormy, especially if you're saying that Stormy was a drag king, because that does fall in line with butch lesbian vibes. Yeah. So this was around 1:30 that morning after Judy Garland's funeral. And according to Marsha, she didn't actually arrive there until after 2 a.m., after the riots had already begun, and after the police had set the bar on fire. She had heard about the goings-on at Stonewall and had gone to get Sylvia before they arrived on the scene. The riots at Stonewall lasted roughly a week, but it wasn't exactly a constant stream of violence being exchanged between the police and the rioters. Instead, it seems after the first 2 days, what it was several spontaneous demonstrations and marches, although it does seem that the first 2 nights were proper rioting at the Stonewall Inn. And while Marsha discredits the notion that she threw a brick at an officer inciting the riots, other witnesses also affirmed this version of events, that she didn't do that. Instead, it is said, and confirmed by several witnesses, that on the second night of the riot at Stonewall, Marsha climbed a lamppost and dropped a heavy bag on a police car, causing the windshield to shatter.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what, Marsha was taking care of business.
Yeah. There were 2 witnesses who also claimed to have seen Marsha throw a shot glass at the mirror behind the bar after it had already been burned, yelling, "I got my civil rights." There's some speculation that her role may have been downplayed because it was known that she was gender nonconforming, but she also suffered from some mental health issues, and it would have given fodder for the opposition of the movement if she had been heralded as the face of the uprising against their repeated harassment by the police. On the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, Marsha marched in the first annual Pride Parade in New York City. At the time, it was called Christopher Street Liberation Day. And this is really the birth of Pride, which is now celebrated around the world through the month of June. And Marsha was a celebrated part of that. She lived a storied life of activism, but she's most notably remembered to this day as the face of the Stonewall riots. She and Sylvia co-founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, or STAR, which provided housing, food, and support to transgender youth experiencing homelessness. In
That's
1973,
also covered in the Deviants War, if anyone is still looking for a reason to read it.
I imagine all of this was in the Deviants War.
Not all of it.
Oh. In 1973, Marsha and Sylvia were banned by LGBT committees from participating in gay liberation events such as Pride because, quote, drag queens were giving them a bad name. It always really hurts me to see examples of members of the LGBTQIA plus community exhibit discriminatory behavior towards one another, but for a variety of reasons, it happens.
There was a movement regarded as the homophile movement, and it was all about respectability politics and creating a projection that queer people are just the same as their straight counterparts, which in many ways we absolutely are. But the truth is they wanted a total removal and a total assimilation into straight heterosexual culture. And so it was all about respectability politics, which ultimately got us nowhere because we weren't respected, regardless of any amount of respectability politics that we engaged in. And so it wasn't, and I don't know if you're going to get to this, and I'm sure you will, until we started to engage in activism that went beyond respectability politics. And the history there is so deep and storied, and it goes and rolls into the AIDS epidemic. It's a lot.
Again, because I had so many big things that I was covering in this, I just kind of touched a little bit on all of them. So I didn't go all that in depth with any of them because I also was trying to make sure that I, kept the crime part in there, which, I mean, it's there from start to finish because their identities were criminalized. Rioting is criminal, but also the police going in and harassing and being violent with people who are part of the community just for being part of the community. That can't be legal. I mean, I know that it happened, but I don't think that it was actually legal. But it didn't necessarily matter what was legal. It was what was done. So, as I mentioned before, Marsha suffered from some mental health issues, and she had periods during her life where she experienced homelessness. During her life, she was arrested more than 100 times because her gender expression was unofficially criminalized by local police, and she did supplement her income occasionally with sex work. In 1990, she contracted HIV, and she revealed that during an interview in 1992. But she had been an outspoken advocate since the AIDS epidemic broke out in the 1980s. She revealed her status in order to encourage people to not fear those who have the virus. July 6th, 1992, shortly after the Pride Parade, the body of 46-year-old Marsha P. Johnson was found floating in the Hudson River. The NYPD ruled that it was a suicide, but many people who knew Marsha strongly contested this as her means of death. Sylvia said in response to this, Marsha was not suicidal. She had plans. She had dreams. She was taken from us, introducing a sinister idea and revealing a dark reality that plagues the trans community even now. Because in 2017, despite trans people making up less than 1% of the population, 29 trans Americans were killed. By 2021, that number had risen to 56. I don't imagine that 2025 is going to serve much better than the 4-year span from 2017 to 2021. Don't ask me why, but something tells me that 2025 to 2029 will likely not demonstrate a decrease in those numbers. 73% of trans people were killed by guns, which is really just a fun American fact. And despite the fact that only 13% of the less than 1% of people who comprise the trans population are Black, 3/4 of known trans murder victims are Black.
Assumably the majority Black trans women.
So, if you're interested in learning more about this facet of the trans experience, do a little reading about Christine Jorgensen's Welcome Embrace by Mainstream Society in 1952 after receiving gender-affirming medical care and surgery in Denmark. I don't know if it's Jorgensen or Jorgensen. Most of the world, the J sound makes a Y sound, but in America, it's not Marsha P. Janssen. Johnson.
Yeah.
In what couldn't possibly be related to the apparent, suicide or death of Marsha P. Johnson, the early 1990s was when anti-gay violence peaked, with 1992 being recorded as the worst year for LGBTQIA plus targeted violence. People came forward after her body had been found and reported seeing that Marsha had been harassed by a group of 4 that was known in the area to rob people. There was also a neighbor of Marsha's, who was known by Michael, who had been seen arguing with her on July 4th, which was the night she was last seen alive. Michael was considered to have a quick temper and was seen allegedly shoving Marsha that evening. According to a witness, it looked as if he wanted to do her harm, and he was hurling homophobic slurs at her. He later was allegedly heard bragging that he had, quote, killed a drag queen named Marsha, which might have been worth investigating instead of dismissing the witness when they attempted to report this to the police, but In 2002, Marsha's cause of death was updated to be an undetermined drowning. This still didn't quite sit well with people because Marsha had a huge wound on the back of her head. Something about that struck people as more in the line of foul play or murder than self-harm or accidentally drowning. The LGBT community was still not happy about this, feeling that it was a miscarriage of justice. It took a decade for the reclassification of her death from suicide to accidental drowning, and it took another decade for it to finally be updated to a possible homicide after activist Mariah Lopez worked to help bring justice one step closer for Marsha. 4 years after this, in 2016, less than a decade ago, the Anti-Violence Project tried to get the police to reopen the case and investigate the death of Marsha P. Johnson officially. This was headed by Victoria Cruz, who succeeded in gaining access to information that was previously not made available as part of the case. During Victoria's work to bring Marsha justice, as well as the greater LGBTQIA+ community, she was filmed by David France, and the footage was used in the 2017 documentary, The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. If you'd like to watch it, it is available on Netflix. But at this point, you've got a lot of homework because you're learning about Christine Jorgensen, you're reading
The Deviants War, the homosexual
Deviants
versus
War.
the United States of America.
And now you're watching The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. And also, if you haven't watched this yet, you need to go do it. You should probably get on... Why have I drawn a blank? I've completely drawn a blank. It's like what Drag Race is fashioned after. Paris is Burning and Tu Wong Fu.
I didn't super care for Tu Wong Fu.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even there are parts of it that I guess are disrespectful, but I feel like it's a more forward-thinking interpretation than something that might be produced today by mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think it's good. Paris is Burning just feels really true to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it gives its proper due to queer people of color who did a lot for the queer community that I don't think they always receive the appropriate recognition for. So,
yeah. So the death and likely murder of Marsha P. Johnson remains unsolved, despite her legacy and what she represents to the LGBTQIA+ community. If you have any information regarding the death of Marsha, please contact the NYPD. For more information on Marsha's legacy, check out the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, linked in our show notes. The primary aim of the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which was founded by a Black trans woman named Elle, is to center the needs of the Black trans population, which is widely underrepresented or supported in social justice movements. The website is an amazing database of resources broken down by needs and location within the United States. If you're able to maybe swing by the website and donate to the Institute just to help them out. And in addition to the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, there is also a waterfront park in Brooklyn that was renamed in 2020 to Marsha P. Johnson State Park, honoring her impact on the community and acknowledging her enduring legacy through her contributions to the LGBT rights movement, and particularly her advocacy work for transgender individuals. So that is the unsolved murder of Marsha P. Johnson, and I actually gave you the choice of 2 cases that I could potentially cover, and this is the one you opted for because you wanted to make sure that our besties out there knew and understood who Marsha was, but also who she still is for the community.
The P doesn't just stand for pay it no mind, it stands for pioneer. And I think when we talk about Marsha P. Johnson, I'm so glad you went over her case today because it gave us an opportunity to talk to our besties a little bit more about the foundation of pride, where it began, and why it's so critical. So many now, through the lens of hindsight, think of pride as being this month-long celebration of queerness. And while it may be that to the queer community, in addition to that, it's about safety and promotion of shared ideals and societal placement. Queer people still die of violence at a higher rate, like you talked about with especially trans women of color. And when we talk about trans pride, outside of just lesbian, gay, bisexual, right, which we now see the US government referring to queer people as the LGB community and intentionally leaving out the T, there is no LGB without the T. And so pride is about safety. And I hope that when you're in the position, besties, to help someone understand that pride isn't just about decadence or self-celebration. It's about a community that for so long was demonized and literally criminalized just for being queer.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thanks. Like I said, it was surface level because if I tried to get in depth with everything, we'd have been here forever.
Dear listener, if any of this information has left you in a place of vulnerability, emotionally, or maybe in terms of even materially vulnerable, please know that as of now, you can still reach out via 988, either through text message or phone call for mental health support services. And for my fellow queers who are listening, just a reminder, while in fact the United States federal government will cease funding for queer-specific help via 988, that will still continue through October. As of right now, that's what we know. And then even when that time has come and gone, 988 will still offer services to queer people, just no longer in a specialized manner. You're still able to reach out to the Trevor Project, and you can check out our Instagram for a whole host of resources that are available to you if you are to be in need.
A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we've got for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and then leave a review.
Recommend us to a friend. That is the best way to help us grow this little podcast, is for you, by word of mouth, to tell someone about us. So please do that now. And if you're able and willing to help us produce this podcast, sign up for our Patreon.
That's right. Go down to the show notes, find the link to Patreon. You can join our supportive bestie tier for just $2 a month. Make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so feel free to reach out with questions or episode suggestions.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.